subway car hummed with its early morning rhythm, a metallic pulse beneath the low murmur of commuters. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow on the worn seats, flickering in time with the train's movements. Maya Rodriguez gripped her messenger bag, her fingers tracing the embroidered edge, a nervous habit she'd developed over years of navigating urban spaces. At 26, she'd mastered the art of urban invisibility, a skill cultivated by countless mornings, just like this one. She glanced around, observing the tapestry of city life unfolding before her. A mother soothed a crying toddler, offering gentle shushes as she rocked him back and forth. A teenager in oversized headphones bobbed his head to a beat only he could hear. An elderly man flipped through a newspaper. The air was a mix of muted conversations, the faint scent of coffee, and the cold, metallic smell unique to subway cars. Maya adjusted the strap of her bag, ensuring her graphic design portfolio was secure. Inside were weeks of hard work, sketches, mock-ups, and finalized pieces she hoped would impress at her upcoming interview. This opportunity was everything she'd been working toward. A chance to break into a competitive industry and prove that her talents extended beyond freelance gigs and passion projects. The train lurched as it pulled away from the station, and she shifted her weight, careful to maintain her personal space in the crowded car. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Siempre llega temprano, es una method de respeto." Always arrive early, it's a sign of respect. Punctuality wasn't just a habit, it was ingrained in her upbringing, a cornerstone of her family's values. Lost in thought, she almost didn't notice the tension brewing at the other end of the car. It started subtly, a few sideways glances, a shuffling of feet. Then, a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise. "Go back to where you came from." Maya's fingers stopped their tracing along the bag's edge, her senses heightened. The words weren't directed at her, not yet, but she recognized the tone. Laden with hatred, vibrating with a visceral anger that seemed to fill the entire train car. It was a sound she'd hoped to never hear again, one that brought back memories of whispered slurs and classroom taunts. An older white man, his face flushed and hands clenched, glared at a group of young passengers. They were students, perhaps college-aged, conversing animatedly in a language Maya couldn't quite place. Their laughter and lively gestures had injected warmth into the cold, impersonal space, a brief respite from the morning commute's monotony. Maya watched, her body tensing. The targeted passengers, two young men wearing headphones, initially tried to ignore him, a strategy she knew all too well. One of them caught the other's eye, a silent communication passing between them. "Stay calm. Don't engage." "I'm talking to you," the man's voice escalated, his body leaning forward aggressively. Veins bulged at his temples and spittle flew from his lips as he spoke. The other passengers began to shrink away, creating a bubble of space around the confrontation. Eyes darted towards phones, newspapers were lifted higher, any excuse to avoid getting involved. Maya felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She remembered the countless times she'd been advised to keep her head down, to not draw attention. But something about this moment was different. Perhaps it was the blatant injustice of it, or perhaps it was the fatigue from years of silent endurance building up inside her. She saw the moment everything could change. The collective breath of the train car seemed to pause, passengers strategically avoiding eye contact. Some looked down at screens, others out windows, a choreographed dance of urban detachment. When she spoke, her voice surprised even herself. "Sir, please stop." The man's attention swiveled, his eyes, filled with a toxic mixture of anger and entitlement, locked onto Maya. "What did you say?" His tone was incredulous, as if shocked that anyone would dare challenge him. She hadn't planned to become the target. Her heart raced, but something, perhaps years of accumulated frustration, kept her voice steady. There's no need to harass them. Please, just let everyone ride in peace. The transformation was instantaneous. What had been a generalized aggression now became a laser-focused assault. "You don't belong here," he snarled, moving closer. The physical space between them collapsed, his body language aggressive, threatening. His gaze swept over her, taking in her dark hair, her olive skin, features that marked her as an outsider in his eyes. Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, that prehistoric response to threat. Her professional composure, carefully constructed over years of navigating corporate spaces, began to crack. Memories flooded back. The snide comments from colleagues, the mispronounced names, the assumptions about her background. "Back off," she said, but her voice wavered slightly. She could feel her palms growing damp, her grip on the messenger bag tightening. He was inches from her now, close enough that she could smell stale coffee and an undercurrent of something sour, perhaps the stench of unchecked rage. "People like you are ruining this city," he muttered, his words a toxic whisper intended to wound. Each syllable felt like a blow, chipping away at the armor she'd spent years building. No one moved, no one intervened. The collective silence was its own form of violence. Maya felt the assault not just physically, but psychologically. Each word was a violation, stripping away her sense of belonging, her right to exist in this shared public space. Her breath became shallow, her vision narrowing to just the man before her. The edges of her sight blurred, the periphery fading as adrenaline surged through her veins. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a young woman subtly lift her phone, angling it towards them. Recording, perhaps? The thought offered little comfort. Evidence wouldn't erase the immediate threat. The train continued its mechanical journey, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within its metal confines. The rhythmic clacking of the wheels against the tracks seemed almost mocking, a steady heartbeat against the chaos of the moment. When he reached out, whether to touch her or further intimidate, Maya would never be certain. Something inside her fractured. Years of microaggressions, of swallowing anger, of being told to be professional and not make a scene, combusted. "Don't touch me," she exclaimed, her voice louder and more forceful than before. The words echoed in the quiet car, drawing the eyes of even the most determinedly oblivious passengers. She stepped back, her design portfolio slipping from her grasp and falling to the floor. Sketches and carefully curated work scattered like leaves, a metaphorical representation of her suddenly exposed vulnerability. Papers slid across the grimy floor, some landing under seats, others settling near the feet of indifferent commuters. The man laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound that seemed to echo through the train car. "Look at you," he sneered. "Can't even hold on to your own things." A mix of humiliation and anger welled up inside her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let him see her cry. She knelt down, hastily gathering the scattered pages, her hands trembling. As she reached for a sketch that had drifted near the feet of an older woman, the woman nudged it away with the tip of her shoe, avoiding eye contact. Maya's gaze flickered upward, a silent plea for assistance met with cold indifference. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the confrontation ended. The train jerked to a halt. Doors opened with a whoosh, the rush of stale underground air mixing with the tension inside the car. People shuffled, avoiding eye contact, eager to distance themselves from the uncomfortable scene. The man gave her one last contemptuous look before stepping off the train. "This city's going to hell," he muttered as he disappeared into the crowd on the platform. Maya remained frozen, her portfolio in pieces around her feet, her sense of self similarly scattered. The doors closed, and the train lurched forward once more, resuming its journey as if nothing had happened. A moment later, a gentle voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. "Here, let me help you." She looked up to see one of the young men who had been the original targets of the man's anger. He offered her a stack of papers he'd collected, his eyes kind but tinged with sorrow. "I'm sorry that happened," he said softly. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the pages. Their fingers brushed briefly, a human connection in the midst of alienation. Another passenger, the teenager with the headphones, knelt to retrieve a stray page that had slid under a seat. He handed it to her silently, nodding before returning to his spot. A small gesture, but it warmed her nonetheless. Maya carefully reassembled her portfolio, inspecting each page for damage. Smudges of dirt marred some of the sketches, and a few edges were crumpled. She smoothed them out as best she could, trying to steady her shaking hands. The subway car settled back into its routine. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, the incident already fading from the forefront of collective memory. But for Maya, the weight of what had transpired pressed heavily on her chest, and she took a deep breath, staring at the reflection in the window opposite her. The blurred image showed a woman who was tired of fighting, of proving herself, of enduring. Yet beneath the fatigue, there was a spark, a resilience that refused to be extinguished. As the train approached her stop, she stood, adjusting the strap of her bag and clutching the portfolio tightly. The doors opened, and she stepped onto the platform, the cool air a welcome contrast to the stagnant atmosphere inside the car. The platform was bustling with activity. Business people hurried to meetings, students chatted excitedly, vendors called out the day's specials. Life continued unabated, the city indifferent to her personal turmoil. But as she ascended the stairs to street level, Maya felt a renewed determination. The incident had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. She thought of her mother's words, the sacrifices her parents had made to give her a chance at success. She emerged onto the sidewalk, the sun peeking through gaps between tall buildings. The city stretched out before her, a sprawling canvas of possibilities. Clutching her portfolio, she set her shoulders back and began walking toward her interview. Today would not be defined by that man's hatred. It would be defined by her perseverance, her talent, and her refusal to be diminished. The path ahead was challenging, but it was hers to walk. Maya Rodriguez was not invisible, she was not powerless, and she would not be silenced. The fluorescent lights of the design studio felt impossibly harsh, casting stark shadows that accentuated every line of exhaustion on Maya's face. The open concept space, usually a hub of creativity and collaboration, seemed cold and uninviting. Desks were arranged in neat clusters, adorned with sketches, mood boards, and the occasional potted plant, striving to bring life into the sterile environment. Maya sat at her workstation, her fingers hovering above the keyboard of her laptop. The screen displayed her latest project, a series of vibrant logos for a new eco-friendly startup, but the colors blurred and shifted, refusing to coalesce into a coherent image. She blinked rapidly, trying to focus, but the designs that once filled her with excitement now felt trivial and distant. Colleagues moved around her with careful, calculated movements, their footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. Whispers floated through the air, barely audible over the hum of computers and the soft strains of instrumental music playing overhead. Maya caught snippets of conversation, hushed tones that ceased whenever she glanced up. Their sideways glances spoke volumes, a mixture of discomfort, uncertainty, and an unspoken desire to avoid confrontation. Some offered tight, sympathetic smiles before quickly looking away, while others pretended to be engrossed in their work, eyes fixed firmly on their screens. The usual camaraderie of the office had been replaced by an unspoken tension that settled heavily over the space. "Maya, "Are you okay?" Sarah, her project manager, approached tentatively. Sarah was a petite woman with sharp features softened by kind brown eyes. She clutched a tablet to her chest like a shield, her knuckles white from the grip. Her voice was a gentle whisper that cut through the office's tense atmosphere. Maya forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine," she responded, the words mechanical and hollow. She could hear the strain in her own voice, the brittleness that hadn't been there before. But she wasn't fine. Not at all. Sarah hesitated, as if weighing whether to press further. "If you need anything, or if you want to talk." "Thanks, but I just need to focus right now," Maya interrupted gently, turning her gaze back to the screen. She appreciated Sarah's concern, but wasn't ready to unpack the tangled knot of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Her phone buzzed on the desk, the sudden vibration startling her. She glanced at the screen. Elena Rodriguez. Her mother's name flashed insistently, the familiar photo of Elena's warm smile causing a lump to form in Maya's throat. Elena's maternal instinct always seemed to pierce through Maya's carefully constructed emotional walls. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the phone and pressed it to her ear. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Mija." Elena's voice was a blend of concern and barely contained fury. "Tell me what happened." Maya's heart clenched. Of course her mother knew something was wrong. They had always shared an unspoken connection, each attuned to the other's emotional currents. The dam broke. Maya's professional composure crumbled, and the raw, unfiltered emotions of the morning's traumatic encounter came flooding out. "How he tried to make me feel small," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. She swiveled her chair away from the open office space, seeking a modicum of privacy. "Like I didn't belong. Like my existence was somehow a problem." Elena's response was immediate and fierce. "You belong everywhere, Maya. Everywhere. Don't you ever let someone make you feel otherwise." Her voice trembled with emotion, a mix of anger and protective love. Maya closed her eyes, letting her mother's words wash over her like a bomb. I didn't expect it. Not like that. Not today." "I wish I could be there with you," Elena said softly. "Are you sure you don't want to come home for a while? We can talk, or not talk, whatever you need." "Thanks, Mom," Maya replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I think I just need some time to process." "Remember, you are strong. This city is as much yours as anyone else's." Elena's voice was steady now, infused with the quiet strength that had always been Maya's anchor. "Love you," Maya whispered. "Te amo, mija." After hanging up, Maya sat in silence for a moment, staring blankly at the geometric pattern of the office carpet. Her mother's unwavering support had always been a source of strength, but today it also highlighted the depth of her own vulnerability. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Meetings were attended, emails were sent, but Maya moved through it all like a ghost, her mind elsewhere. She found herself flinching at sudden sounds. The clatter of a dropped coffee mug, the shrill ring of a phone. And her body remained tense, muscles coiled, as if expecting another attack. By the time evening rolled around, exhaustion weighed heavily upon her. She decided to leave the office early, packing up her belongings with meticulous care. As she stepped out into the crisp night air, she hesitated before heading toward the subway station. The thought of descending into that subterranean world filled her with dread. Opting instead to walk, she navigated the bustling streets, the cacophony of the city wrapping around her. Neon signs flickered to life, and the scent of street food mingled with exhaust fumes. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, feeling exposed despite the crowds. When she finally reached her apartment, a modest one-bedroom nestled in a lively neighborhood, she sighed with relief. Inside, the familiar surroundings offered a semblance of safety. Framed photographs adorned the walls, images of her family, snapshots from her travels, and prints of her favorite artworks. She sank onto the sofa, the soft cushions enveloping her. The quiet of the apartment was a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, the subway scene replayed in vivid detail, the man's hateful words, the silence of the other passengers, the overwhelming feeling of isolation. Hypervigilance consumed her. The creak of the building settling made her jump, and the distant sirens outside set her nerves on edge. Sleep became a battlefield. She tossed and turned, sheets tangling around her legs as she struggled against the onslaught of unwelcome memories. In the early hours of the morning, she gave up on rest. Sitting by the window, she gazed out at the city skyline. Lights glittered like stars, and she could see the faint outline of the bridge spanning the river, a symbol of connection in a city that suddenly felt so fragmented. She found herself debating whether to report the incident. The rational part of her understood the importance of documentation, of standing up against such behavior. But the emotional toll of reliving the experience, of potentially facing skepticism or indifference, loomed large. "Would anyone even believe me?" she whispered into the darkness. "Would it change anything?" Her thoughts drifted to her work. Her design projects, typically a source of joy and creative expression, now felt like insurmountable challenges. Concentration was elusive. She opened her sketchbook, hoping to find solace in the familiar act of drawing. But the pages remained blank. The following day, Maya returned to the office, determined to regain a sense of normalcy. As she settled at her desk, a cup of steaming coffee in hand, she noticed a small note tucked beneath her keyboard. "Thinking of you. Here if you need anything. Sarah." Maya smiled faintly, touched by the gesture. She glanced across the room to where Sarah was engrossed in conversation with a coworker. Catching Maya's eye, Sarah offered a warm, encouraging nod. Throughout the day, Maya made an effort to engage. She joined in on brainstorming sessions, contributed ideas during meetings, and even shared a laugh with a colleague over a shared technical glitch. But beneath the surface, the lingering effects of the trauma persisted. Alina noticed the change immediately during a video call that evening. "You look tired," she remarked gently. "I am," Maya admitted. "Everything feels heavier." "You need help, Mija," Elena said softly, her eyes reflecting concern. "This isn't something you can fight alone." The suggestion of seeking help, whether therapy or support, felt both terrifying and necessary. Maya knew that acknowledging her vulnerability was a sign of strength, not weakness, yet the thought of unraveling the tightly wound threads of her emotions was daunting. "I'll think about it," she promised. That night, as darkness settled over the city, Maya sat at her desk once more. She opened her laptop and began researching support groups and therapists specializing in trauma. The sheer number of options was overwhelming, but as she read through testimonials and resources, a glimmer of hope emerged. She reached out to a local community center that offered counseling services, sending an email to inquire about appointments. It was a small step, but it felt significant. As she prepared for bed, Maya stood by the window again, watching as the city's lights flickered like distant beacons. The subway, her primary mode of transportation, had become a source of fear. But she resolved not to let that fear dictate her life. The incident hadn't just been about a racist encounter, it was about power, about who gets to claim space, about the constant negotiation of identity in a system designed to marginalize. Maya knew her response would define her, not just as a victim, but as a survivor. Her mother's words echoed, "You belong everywhere." Maya whispered into the quiet room, "I belong everywhere." For the first time since the incident, she felt a stirring of determination. There was a long road ahead, of healing, of reclaiming her sense of self, But she wasn't alone. With the support of her loved ones and her own inner strength, she would navigate the challenges to come. As she climbed into bed, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The city outside continued its restless pulse, but within her small sanctuary, Maya embraced the possibility of renewal. Tomorrow was a new day. The silence in Maya's apartment was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional soft ping of her phone and the distant hum of city traffic. Sunlight filtered weakly through the half-drawn blinds, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the cluttered room. What had once been a sanctuary now felt like a suffocating prison of her own making. The vibrant paintings and inspirational quotes that adorned the walls seemed to mock her current state, reminders of a self she no longer recognized. Her normally meticulous workspace, a testament to her graphic design precision, had devolved into a chaotic landscape of unfinished projects and scattered sketches. Papers littered the desk and spilled onto the hardwood floor, mingling with empty coffee cups and crumpled receipts. The tools of her trade, fine-tip pens, color swatches, graphic tablets, lay abandoned, gathering dust. Maya sat hunched over her laptop, staring blankly at the screen. Her latest design project sat untouched, the digital canvas a stark reflection of her fractured mental state. The cursor blinked impatiently against a blank white page. Colors that typically danced with vibrancy now appeared muted and lifeless, much like Maya herself. She moved the mouse half-heartedly, attempting to summon the creative spark that once flowed so easily, but inspiration remained elusive. The racist encounter on the subway had metastasized from a singular moment into an all-consuming psychological wound. It replayed incessantly in her mind, the man's hateful glare, his venomous words, the tangible hostility that filled the air. Each recollection was as vivid as the moment it happened, an unending loop that trapped her in the past. Panic attacks became her new unwelcome companion. They arrived without warning, transforming mundane moments into terrifying ordeals. The shrill ring of a phone would send her spiraling, heart racing, breaths coming in rapid, shallow gasps. A car horn blaring outside could trigger a cold sweat, her body reacting as if under immediate threat. The aggressive stranger's voice echoed in her mind, a persistent phantom that haunted her waking hours and invaded her dreams. Her professional life began to unravel. Deadlines whooshed past like missed trains, each one adding a new layer of guilt and anxiety. Emails from clients piled up unanswered, and her inbox became a source of dread rather than opportunity. Her typically reliable creative flow had been replaced by a paralyzing anxiety that made even simple design tasks feel insurmountable. The cursor blinking on the blank screen seemed to taunt her, a silent indictment of her inability to move forward. Her creative director, usually patient and understanding, began to send increasingly concerned messages. "Hey Maya, just checking in on the project. Let me know if you need any support," one read. Another was more direct. "Maya, we need to talk about your deliverables. Please schedule a meeting this week." The thought of discussing her declining performance filled her with a profound sense of shame. Elena noticed the transformation in her daughter immediately. During their weekly Sunday dinner, a cherished tradition Maya had tried to maintain despite everything, her mother's perceptive eyes caught every nuanced shift. Maya pushed her food around her plate, appetite lost. The warmth that once radiated from her seemed dimmed, replaced by a restless energy. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her glass, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Meha," Elena said softly, reaching across the table to place a hand over Maya's. Her touch was gentle, yet grounding. "This is not you. The incident on the subway, it's consuming you." Maya looked up, meeting her mother's gaze. For a moment she attempted a brave smile, but it quickly crumbled. "Consuming me?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. It's destroyed me, Mama. Every public space feels like a potential battlefield now. I can't even walk down the street without looking over my shoulder." Elena's eyes reflected deep empathy mixed with concern. "Have you thought about speaking to someone? A professional who can help you process this?" "I've watched." Maya pulled her hand back, folding her arms protectively across her chest. "I don't see how talking will change anything. It won't erase what happened." "No, it won't erase it," Elena agreed gently. "But it might help you heal." Her social network had gradually faded into the background. Friends' text messages became less frequent. Group chats buzzed without her participation. Invitations to outings dwindled, replaced by polite excuses when she declined too many times. Whether out of discomfort or a genuine inability to understand her experience, Maya felt increasingly isolated. The silent bystanders from the subway incident seemed to have multiplied, their indifference permeating her personal life. One evening, her closest friend Aisha called. "Hey, stranger." Aisha's voice was warm but tinged with concern. "I haven't seen you in weeks. Is everything okay?" Maya hesitated before responding. I'm managing," she said evasively. "Are you sure? You know you can talk to me about anything." "I appreciate it," Maya replied, her throat tight. "I just need some time." "Okay," Aisha said softly. "Just know that I'm here for you. Anytime." After hanging up, Maya stared at the phone, guilt and sadness welling up inside her. She wanted to reach out, to let someone in, but the vulnerability felt too overwhelming. Sleep became a treacherous landscape of nightmares. Most nights she lay awake, the silence of her apartment amplifying her racing thoughts. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, her dreams were vivid and unsettling. She would find herself back on the subway, the man's face looming large, his words distorted and echoing. The other passengers would morph into faceless shadows, their eyes blank as they watched her struggle. She would wake up gasping, sheets damp with sweat, the weight of the nightmares lingering long after dawn. The most terrifying realization was how the trauma had fundamentally altered her perception of herself. Maya had always prided herself on being resilient, on navigating the complex terrains of being a first-generation professional with grace and determination. She was the one who overcame obstacles, who faced challenges head-on. Now she felt stripped of that identity, reduced to a victim defined by a moment of hatred. Her work, once a source of pride and joy, now felt meaningless. She questioned her abilities, doubted her worth. Even small decisions became monumental tasks, and the fear of making a mistake paralyzed her. When she finally agreed to see a therapist, it was at Elena's gentle insistence. Dr. Patel's office was a warm, inviting space, filled with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a peaceful watercolor painting hung above the desk. "Thank you for coming in, Maya," Dr. Patel said, her voice calm and reassuring. "I understand you've been through a difficult experience." Maya shifted uneasily in her chair. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "Wherever you feel comfortable," Dr. Patel encouraged. "This is a safe space." As the sessions progressed, Maya began to unpack the layers of her trauma. Dr. Patel helped her understand that her reactions were not a sign of weakness, but a natural response to what she'd endured. "It's common to feel a loss of control after such an event," the therapist explained. "The goal is to help you regain a sense of safety and empowerment." Public transportation remained an insurmountable hurdle. The mere thought of descending into the subway station triggered a visceral response. Her palms would sweat, her heart rate would spike, and nausea would coil in her stomach. Instead, she walked whenever possible, avoiding crowded areas and taking routes that kept her in open spaces. Her world, once expansive and full of possibilities, had shrunk to the limited perimeter of her apartment and necessary outings. The city she'd loved for its vibrancy and diversity now felt oppressive, filled with hidden dangers. One afternoon, as she walked home from a therapy session, Maya passed a mural she'd never noticed before. It depicted a powerful image of a woman rising from flames, phoenix-like, surrounded by vibrant colors and affirmations in various languages. Strength, resilience, courage. She stopped to take it in, the artwork resonating deeply within her. A small plaque at the base read, "Created by community artists to honor those who have faced adversity." For the first time in weeks, Maya felt a glimmer of something other than fear, a spark of determination. She pulled out her sketchbook, which she'd started carrying again at Dr. Patel's suggestion, and began to draw. Her lines were tentative at first, but grew bolder as she lost herself in the creative process. The noise of the city faded into the background, and for a moment, she reconnected with a part of herself she thought had been lost. Elena watched her daughter's gradual shift with cautious optimism. "How was your session today?" she asked over dinner. "It was good," Maya replied thoughtfully. "We talked about rebuilding routines and finding anchors in my day." "That sounds promising." Maya nodded. "I even started drawing again. Just sketches, but it's a start." "That's wonderful, Mija." Elena reached over to squeeze her hand. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Mama." Maya offered a genuine smile. "I know it's a long road, but I feel like maybe, just maybe, I'm beginning to heal." The journey was far from over, but Maya was taking the first steps towards reclaiming her life. She began to open up to Aisha, sharing her experiences and fears. Together they made plans to meet in quiet, comfortable settings, slowly reintroducing social interactions. She also started attending a support group for survivors of racial trauma. Listening to others share their stories, Maya realized she was not alone. The solidarity and understanding she found there helped alleviate the isolation that had enveloped her. At work, she scheduled a meeting with her creative director. Taking a deep breath, she explained the situation, apologizing for her recent performance. To her relief, he responded with empathy. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Take the time you need. We're here to support you." As weeks turned into months, Maya continued to navigate the complexities of her recovery. There were setbacks and difficult days, but also moments of joy and accomplishment. She completed a new design project, a series of illustrations focused on healing and resilience, that was met with praise from her colleagues and clients. The trauma had changed her, but it did not define her. Through therapy, the support of loved ones, and her own inner strength, Maya began to rebuild. She learned to acknowledge her pain without letting it consume her, transforming it into a source of empathy and connection. One evening, she returned to the mural that had inspired her. Standing before it, she felt a sense of peace. The city around her was still bustling, unpredictable, but she no longer felt overwhelmed by it. As she walked home, Maya realized she was no longer merely surviving, she was living. The soft amber light of Marcus's office felt like a gentle reprieve from the storm raging inside Maya's mind. The late afternoon sun filtered through gauzy curtains, casting dappled patterns on the polished oak floors. Pale wooden bookshelves lined the walls, each shelf teeming with volumes that seemed to whisper stories of healing and understanding. Titles on psychology, philosophy, and cultural studies were interspersed with potted plants, their green leaves adding a touch of life to the serene space. A subtle scent of lavender lingered in the air, and the quiet hum of a white noise machine created a cocoon of privacy. Maya's fingers traced nervous patterns on the soft fabric of the upholstered chair, her body coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. She was hyper-aware of every sound, the distant siren wailing several streets away, the muffled footsteps of someone in the hallway, the rhythmic ticking of a minimalist clock on the wall. Marcus sat across from her in a matching armchair, a low table with a box of tissues and a small water pitcher between them. He studied her with kind, attentive eyes that held no judgment, only compassionate curiosity. He was a black therapist in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair that curled just above his ears and a neatly trimmed beard. His attire was professional yet approachable, a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and a pair of white waistcoats. A delicate beaded bracelet encircled his wrist, an unexpected splash of color. "Can you tell me about what brought you here today?" His voice was soft, deliberate, each word enunciated with care. Maya's laugh was brittle, almost sharp, a stark contrast to the room's tranquility. "Which part?" she replied, her eyes darting briefly to meet his before skittering away. "The racist attack on the subway, the nightmares, the way I can't seem to breathe normally anymore." Her words carried layers of pain, anger, vulnerability, exhaustion. She hadn't intended to sound so harsh, but the defenses she'd built were battling against the vulnerability required in this space. Marcus nodded gently, absorbing her words without reacting to their edge. "It sounds like there's a lot weighing on you," he said. "Let's start wherever feels most comfortable for you." She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the armrests. Silence stretched between them, but Marcus seemed unhurried, giving her the space she needed. The ticking clock marked the passing seconds, each one amplifying the tension she felt. "I suppose I should just tell you what happened," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Get it all out there." "Take your time," Marcus encouraged. "We're in no rush." The session unfolded like a carefully mapped emotional landscape. Maya described the subway incident with clinical precision at first, her graphic designer's mind breaking down the experience into discrete, manageable details. She recounted the metallic hum of the train, the exact phrasing of the man's hateful words, the sequence of events, as if she were an observer rather than the victim. But underneath the structured narrative, raw emotion bubbled: fear, humiliation, rage. As she spoke, her facade began to crack. Her voice wavered when she described how no one intervened, how the collective silence had felt like an unspoken agreement with her aggressor. "I've always known racism exists," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Microaggressions, offhand comments, being overlooked at work. I thought I could handle it, but this felt different. This wasn't subtle. This was a blatant, violent attack, a complete demolition of my sense of self." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his hands loosely clasped in his lap. "Can you tell me more about what that demolition feels like?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. Tears threatened, but Maya refused to let them fall. She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on a knot in the wooden floorboards. "It's like everything I believed about myself, about the progress I thought society had made, was a lie. I feel exposed, vulnerable in a way I didn't think was possible. Every crowded space feels dangerous now. The subway, the streets, even my workplace. I can't shake the feeling that at any moment someone could attack me again." Her admission hung heavy in the air. Marcus gave her a moment before responding. "It sounds like the experience has deeply affected your sense of safety and trust in others and perhaps in yourself." She nodded silently, her hands gripping the chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. "My body remembers," she said finally, "even when my mind wants to forget. I get these panic attacks out of nowhere. My heart races, I can't breathe, and it feels like I'm back on that train, trapped." Marcus observed her carefully. "Our bodies often hold on to trauma, expressing it through physical sensations when our minds are overwhelmed," he explained gently. "What you're experiencing is a normal response to an abnormal situation." She looked up at him, a hint of skepticism in her eyes. "It doesn't feel normal. It feels debilitating." "I understand," he said, "and that's why we're here, to help you find ways to cope and heal. He introduced her to initial trauma processing techniques, grounding exercises designed to help her reconnect with her body's safety mechanisms. "Let's try something together," he suggested. "Place your feet flat on the floor and take a deep breath in." She followed his instructions hesitantly, inhaling slowly. "Good. Now exhale fully. Focus on the sensation of the chair supporting you, the floor beneath your feet. Notice 3 things you can see in the room." Maya glanced around. The potted plant by the window, the painting of the ocean, and your bracelet. Marcus smiled softly. "Excellent. Now, 3 things you can hear." She listened. "The ticking clock, distant traffic, and my own breathing." "Perfect," he affirmed. "Grounding exercises like this can help bring you back to the present moment when anxiety starts to take over." They practiced a few more techniques: mindful observation, controlled breathing, sensory awareness. Each exercise felt like learning a new language, unfamiliar but not impossible. They also explored deeper layers, childhood experiences that had primed her for this moment. Maya shared stories of her upbringing, the daughter of immigrants who had their own complex relationship with identity and belonging. She spoke of her mother's resilience, the lessons imparted about working twice as hard to get half as far. She talked about what it was like to watch her mother as she worked her way up. "She always told me to keep my head down to avoid making waves," Maya recalled, "but also to be proud of who I am. It was confusing sometimes." Navigating those dual messages can be challenging, Marcus acknowledged. Cultural pressures and familial expectations can shape how we respond to adversity. "Maybe that's why I feel so lost," she mused. "I've spent so much time trying to fit in, to be professional and composed. But now, all those defenses are gone." "Your mother's resilience is also part of your inheritance," Marcus observed. "Not just the trauma, but the strength to survive it." Maya considered this. "I never thought of it that way." "Trauma can make us feel disconnected from ourselves and our roots," he continued. "Reconnecting with your identity can be a powerful part of the healing process." As the session progressed, Maya found herself opening up more than she had anticipated. Marcus's steady presence provided a safe container for her pain. He didn't rush her or offer platitudes. Instead, he validated her experiences and emotions. By session's end, Maya felt simultaneously exhausted and slightly hopeful. The wound was still raw, but for the first time someone had witnessed her pain without attempting to minimize it. As she prepared to leave, Marcus offered a final observation. "Healing isn't linear," he said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Some days will feel impossible, and others will bring small victories. But remember, you're not alone in this process. You've already shown incredible courage by being here today." She nodded, absorbing his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "I wasn't sure about coming, but I'm glad I did." "Would you like to schedule another session?" he asked. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I think I'd like that." Walking out of the building, Maya felt something inside her shift. The air was crisp, the late autumn chill hinting at the approaching winter. She pulled her coat tighter around her, but for once, the cold didn't feel so oppressive. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm, cars honking, pedestrians rushing by, the distant rumble of a subway train beneath her feet. The streets were a tapestry of movement and sound, an endless flow of energy that had once invigorated her, but lately had only added to her anxiety. But today she noticed details she'd overlooked in her haze of fear. The street vendor laughing with a customer over a shared joke, a group of children skipping down the sidewalk, their backpacks bouncing with each step, an elderly couple walking hand in hand, their pace unhurried amidst the bustle. Maya was starting to understand that her healing didn't require the world's permission. She could carve out moments of peace and connection even amidst chaos. The techniques Marcus had taught her were small tools, but they offered a semblance of control. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from Aisha. "Thinking of you. Let's catch up soon." She smiled, her fingers moving to type a response. "I'd like that. How about this weekend?" As she made her way home, Maya allowed herself to imagine a future where the subway incident wasn't the defining moment of her life, where she could reclaim her routines, her creativity, her sense of self. The journey ahead was uncertain and would undoubtedly have its challenges, but for the first time in weeks, the path didn't seem entirely obscured. She passed by a community center with a colorful mural painted on its side, a vibrant collage of faces and symbols representing unity and resilience. The words, "Stronger Together," were emblazoned across it in bold letters. Maya paused to take it in, feeling a connection to the art and the sentiment behind it. She snapped a photo, thinking it might inspire her next design project. Perhaps she could channel her experiences into her work, creating something that spoke to others who had felt unseen or marginalized. Arriving at her apartment building, she climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator, each step grounding her further in her decision to move forward. Inside, the familiar surroundings greeted her, a mix of comfort and memories. She placed her bag on the couch and sat down at her desk, opening her sketchbook. For a moment she stared at the blank page, uncertainty creeping back in. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to draw. Her lines were tentative at first, but soon they flowed more freely. Shapes took form, intertwined figures, abstract representations of struggle and growth, of fragmentation and cohesion. Time slipped by unnoticed as she lost herself in the creative process. When she finally set her pencil down, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The sketch wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a tangible expression of her journey. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. She glanced at the clock, surprised to see it was already evening. Deciding to treat herself, she ordered takeout from her favorite Thai place. As she waited for the food to arrive, Maya sent a message to her mother. "Started therapy today. It was hard, but good. Love you, Mama." Elena's response came quickly. "Proud of you, mija. Call me when you're ready. Te amo." Settling down with her meal, Maya felt a quiet contentment. The road to healing stretched ahead, but she was no longer standing at the starting line alone. She had support, her therapist, her family, her friends, and perhaps most importantly, herself. Her journey was just beginning, but she was taking the first steps with intention and hope. As the night enveloped the city, Maya allowed herself a moment of reflection. She walked over to the window, gazing out at the skyline. Lights twinkled from buildings and street lamps, a mosaic of life in every direction. "Just one day at a time," she whispered to herself. And for the first time since the incident, that felt possible. The community center stood at the corner of Maple and 3rd, a modest brick building adorned with colorful murals depicting scenes of unity and diversity. Maya hesitated at the entrance, her fingers wrapped tightly around the strap of her bag. The tall glass doors reflected her uncertain expression, the city bustling behind her as pedestrians moved along the sidewalk, oblivious to her internal turmoil. She took a deep breath, summoning the courage to step inside. The lobby was warm and inviting, with posters announcing various events, yoga classes, art workshops, language exchanges. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of lavender, creating an atmosphere that was both calming and energizing. Following the signs to room 204, She climbed a flight of stairs, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, casting a pale glow that contrasted sharply with the vibrant paintings lining the walls. Works by local artists, showcasing themes of resilience and hope. The door to the small conference room was ajar. Peering inside, Maya saw a circle of chairs arranged thoughtfully around a low table, adorned with a bouquet of wildflowers. The simplicity of the setup was both welcoming and intimidating. She clutched the referral slip from Marcus, her therapist, her fingers tracing the creases as if they might provide some form of protection, or perhaps an anchor in this unfamiliar territory. When Marcus had first suggested the support group for survivors of racial trauma, Maya had resisted. "I don't want to be defined by what happened to me," she had argued during their last session, her voice tinged with frustration. "I just want to move on." Marcus had given her a gentle, understanding smile. "Healing isn't about forgetting or moving on as if nothing happened," he had said. "It's about processing your experiences and finding a way to integrate them into your life without them overwhelming you. Sometimes sharing with others who have faced similar challenges can offer solace and new perspectives." Now, standing at the threshold of the group, Maya felt the weight of that decision. The exhaustion of carrying her pain alone had worn down her defenses, and a part of her yearned for connection, for someone to tell her that she wasn't alone in this. She entered the room quietly, choosing a chair near the corner where she could observe without being too conspicuous. The walls were painted a soothing pale blue, and a large window offered a view of the community garden below, where volunteers tended to rows of vegetables and flowers. People began to filter into the room, a diverse tapestry of ages, backgrounds, and expressions. Maya scanned the faces, noting the subtle signs of apprehension that mirrored her own. Not victims, she realized, but survivors. Each person carried an invisible story, threads of struggle and perseverance woven into their very being. A middle-aged black woman with silver-streaked hair entered gracefully, adjusting her glasses as she took a seat. She wore a flowing purple scarf that contrasted beautifully with her dark skin, and her eyes held a depth of experience. A young Asian man in a pressed button-down shirt settled into a chair across from Maya, his posture stiff, tension visible in the set of his shoulders and the clench of his jaw. An older white woman, perhaps an ally or a professional, sat near the facilitator's chair, offering a warm smile to those around her. "Welcome, everyone," the facilitator began, her voice enveloping the room with a gentle authority. She was a black woman named Diane, her short curls framing a face etched with both kindness and strength. Dressed in a simple yet elegant earth-toned dress, she exuded a calm confidence that immediately commanded respect. "This is a space of healing, not performance," Diane continued, her gaze meeting each person's in turn. "What we share here is confidential, and no one is required to speak before they're ready. We are here to support one another, to listen, and to hold space for each other's journeys." Maya felt her throat tighten. The last thing she wanted was to speak, to relive the subway incident that had shattered her sense of safety. Exposing the raw, wounded parts of herself felt both necessary and terrifying. Diane's eyes softened as she seemed to sense the collective apprehension. "Healing is a personal process," she said. "Whether you choose to share today or simply listen, know that your presence contributes to the strength of this community." The group began with a brief moment of silence, a shared breath that settled the room's energy. Then, one by one, stories emerged. Not just of singular incidents, but of accumulated pain, of the subtle and overt ways racism had left its mark on their lives. Michael, the young Asian man, spoke first. "At work, I'm constantly being second-guessed," he said, his voice measured but laced with frustration. "My ideas are overlooked until someone else repeats them. I've been there for 3 years, but I still feel like I'm not truly part of the team. Regina, the middle-aged woman with the silver-streaked hair, adjusted her scarf thoughtfully before she began. Back in the 80s, I was one of the few black women in my field, she shared. I faced obstacles at every turn, promotions denied, credits stolen. I thought things would have changed by now. But my daughter is experiencing the same struggles. As each person spoke, Maya listened intently. Her initial skepticism began to dissolve, replaced by a growing recognition. These weren't just stories. They were testimonies of resilience. The common threads of their experiences created a tapestry of understanding. A Latino man named Carlos described an incident where he was profiled by the police while walking in his own neighborhood. A young woman wearing a hijab, Amina, recounted the fear she felt every time a news story portrayed Muslims negatively, knowing it would affect how strangers treated her. Maya's heart ached with each account, but she also felt a solidarity forming, a realization that she was part of a larger narrative. The isolation she'd felt since the subway incident began to lessen. When there was a pause in the sharing, Diane looked gently in Maya's direction. "Would you like to share anything today?" she asked, her tone inviting but not pressuring. Maya hesitated, her palms damp as she clasped them in her lap. She glanced around the circle, meeting the empathic gazes of the group members. Taking a shaky breath, she nodded. "It happened a few weeks ago," she began softly, her voice barely audible. "I was on the subway, on my way to an important interview." She swallowed, her throat dry. An older man started harassing some other passengers, young men who were just minding their own business. I asked him to stop. The memories flooded back, vivid and raw. "He turned on me," she continued, her voice wavering. "He got in my face, said I didn't belong here. No one did anything, they all just watched." She paused, the weight of the silence pressing upon her. "I felt invisible," she said, her eyes fixed on her hands, "but also hypervisible. Seen, but not in a way that made me human, like I was an object of disdain, not a person." Murmurs of understanding rippled through the group. Michael nodded sympathetically, and Regina reached out as if to offer comfort. "The violation wasn't just in his words," Maya added, finding strength as she spoke. "It was in the silence of everyone around us, the way they averted their eyes, acted like nothing was happening. It made me question everything, my safety, my worth, my place in this city." Diane leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "That's the paradox of racism," she said gently. "It both erases and hyper-scrutinizes. It makes you feel insignificant and yet targeted. Your experience is valid, Maya, and your feelings are real." A sense of relief washed over her. For the first time since the incident, she felt truly seen and heard. The group wasn't offering pity, but recognition, a shared understanding that came from lived experiences. Another member, the older white woman named Margaret, spoke up. "Thank you for sharing that," she said sincerely. "It's important for us to acknowledge these realities. As an ally, I know I have a responsibility to listen and to act." Maya appreciated the sincerity in Margaret's words. It was a stark contrast to the indifference she had encountered before. As the session continued, the conversation shifted toward coping strategies and self-care. Diane encouraged everyone to share what had helped them navigate their journeys. "Writing poetry has been my outlet," Amina offered. "It allows me to express emotions that are hard to articulate." "I've found solace in activism," Carlos added. "Channeling my anger into pushing for change gives me a sense of purpose." Maya considered their words. "I've been disconnected from my art," she admitted. "I'm a graphic designer, but lately I haven't been able to create anything." Sometimes, trauma can block our creative channels, Diane observed. But reconnecting with your passions can be a powerful step toward healing. As the meeting came to a close, Diane reminded them, healing is not linear. There will be ups and downs, but together we can support each other through the process. After the session, as people began to gather their belongings, Michael approached Maya. His demeanor was relaxed, a gentle smile softening his features. "First time?" he asked, his tone friendly. Maya nodded, returning his smile tentatively. "Yeah. It gets easier," he said reassuringly. "Not because the pain goes away, but because you learn to carry it differently. Sharing helps lighten the load." "Thanks," she replied. "I wasn't sure about coming today, but I'm glad I did." "Me too," he said. "It's good to know we're not alone in this." They exchanged contact information, Michael suggesting they grab coffee sometime to continue the conversation. Maya agreed, feeling a spark of connection. Stepping outside the community center, the late afternoon sun bathed the street in a golden hue. The city seemed slightly different, still crowded and chaotic, but with a newfound sense of possibility. The streets that had felt like minefields now felt like shared spaces again, filled with others navigating their own paths. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a text from her mother, Elena. "How did it go, mija?" Maya stared at the message, her thoughts swirling. She considered the vulnerability she'd just experienced, the weight that had been slightly lifted, the hope that had begun to take root. With a small smile, she typed back, "It was different, in a good way. I'll tell you about it later." Hitting send, she felt as though she was reclaiming a piece of herself. The simple act of reaching out was a step forward, a movement toward healing. As she walked down the street, Maya noticed the sounds of laughter from a nearby park, the enticing aroma of food wafting from a food truck, the rhythm of footsteps blending into a communal heartbeat. The city was alive, and she was part of it. Passing by a storefront, she caught her reflection in the window. Her posture was a bit straighter, her expression softer. The person looking back at her was still healing, still carrying scars, but also rediscovering strength. She allowed herself a moment of appreciation, recognizing the courage it had taken to attend the support group, to open up, to begin the arduous journey of healing. Maya took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp evening air. She knew there was still a long road ahead, with challenges yet to face, but for the first time since the incident, she felt equipped to navigate it. The community center had provided more than just a support group. It had offered connection, validation, and a reminder that she was not alone in her struggle. Others walked alongside her, and together they could find ways to heal and to confront the systemic issues that had caused their pain. As she made her way home, thoughts of re-engaging with her art began to surface. Perhaps she could channel her experiences into her designs, creating work that spoke to resilience and solidarity. The idea sparked a flicker of inspiration. Reaching her apartment, Maya climbed the stairs with a lighter step. Inside, she set her bag down and pulled out her sketchbook. Sitting by the window where the last rays of sunlight illuminated the pages, she began to draw. Lines flowed across the paper, forming interwoven patterns that symbolized connection and growth. She lost track of time as shapes emerged, a fusion of abstract forms and symbolic imagery that captured the essence of her journey. When she finally looked up, the room was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. She felt a sense of fulfillment that had been absent for too long. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Aisha. "Hey, been thinking about you. Let's catch up soon." Maya smiled, typing back, "I'd love that. How about this weekend?" The act of reaching out, of allowing others back into her life, felt like another significant step. Closing her sketchbook, she gazed out at the city lights flickering to life. The skyline was a mosaic against the deepening sky, each illuminated window representing countless stories, struggles, joys, and everything in between. Maya whispered softly to herself, "I'm healing." And with that acknowledgement, she embraced the uncertainty of the future, knowing that she had the strength and support to face whatever lay ahead. The first step of her healing journey had begun, not in isolation, but within a community that understood and shared her experiences. It was a path toward reclaiming not only her sense of self, but also her place in the world. As night settled over the city, Maya felt a quiet determination. Tomorrow held promise, and she was ready to meet it. The pale morning light filtered through Marcus's office windows, casting a gentle glow across the room. The space was thoughtfully designed to evoke calmness, a sanctuary amidst the urban bustle outside. Soft earth tones colored the walls, complemented by shelves lined with books and the occasional potted plant. A subtle scent of chamomile lingered in the air, soothing frayed nerves. Maya sat rigidly on the comfortable armchair, upholstered in a warm shade of olive green. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, fingers entwined as if holding on to an invisible lifeline. It was a physical manifestation of the tension she was learning to recognize and release. She took a deep breath, the fabric of her blouse rising and falling as she tried to steady herself. Marcus settled into the chair opposite her, a serene presence in his tailored navy suit and open-collared shirt. His dark eyes conveyed empathy and patience, framed by glasses that reflected the soft glow of the morning sun. A notebook rested on his knee, though he rarely glanced at it during their sessions, preferring to give her his full attention. "Today," Marcus said gently, his voice carrying the comforting timbre that Maya had come to appreciate. "We're going to work on structured exposure therapy. This isn't about forcing you to relive trauma, but about gradually reclaiming your sense of safety and control." Maya nodded, her throat tight. "I understand," she murmured, though the prospect filled her with a mix of apprehension and determination. The thought of deliberately confronting the environment that had caused her such profound pain made her heart race, yet she knew that avoidance only tightened the grip of fear. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his demeanor encouraging. "Remember, this is a collaborative process. We'll take it at your pace. The goal is to redefine your relationship with spaces that have felt unsafe, particularly the subway." She glanced toward the window, watching the city come to life below, the flow of traffic, pedestrians hurriedly starting their day. The world kept moving, oblivious to her internal struggle. "It's just, every time I think about stepping onto a train, my chest tightens," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's completely natural," Marcus reassured her. "Your mind is associating the subway with danger because of what happened. Our aim is to help you create new associations, ones where you feel empowered and secure." He waited a moment before continuing. "We'll start with visualization techniques. I'd like you to close your eyes if you're comfortable, and imagine the subway. But this time, you're not imagining the moment of the attack. Instead, picture yourself as strong, grounded, as someone who belongs in that space." Maya hesitated before allowing her eyes to drift shut. She focused on her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale as Marcus had taught her. The ambient sounds of the office, the muted hum of the air conditioner, the distant siren of an ambulance, faded into the background. "Picture yourself standing on the platform," Marcus guided. "Feel the solid ground beneath your feet. You're calm, confident. The train arrives, and you step onto it with ease." At first, the image held steady. She imagined herself dressed in her favorite outfit, a soft blue dress paired with comfortable shoes. Other passengers went about their routines, and she was simply one among them, untroubled. But soon, unwelcome fragments intruded. A flash of the aggressive man's face, the sensation of being trapped, the hush of the indifferent crowd. Her heart rate quickened, and her palms grew damp. Her hands began to tremble, and she opened her eyes abruptly, a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead. "I can't," she said shakily. "It all comes flooding back." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "It's okay," he said softly. "These reactions are normal. Trauma doesn't disappear overnight. What's important is that you're confronting these feelings in a safe environment." She wiped her hands on a tissue, frustration creeping in. "I just want to be okay," she whispered. "And you will be," Marcus assured her. "One step at a time. Let's try a grounding exercise." He gestured gently, prompting her to look around the room. "Name 5 things you can see." Maya took a moment, her eyes scanning the space. "Your notebook, the painting on the wall, that plant by the window, the rug under the coffee table, and the clock." "Good," he encouraged. "Now 4 things you can touch." She reached out, touching the armrest of her chair, the fabric of the chair, my necklace, the soft leather of my shoes, the pages of my journal. "Excellent. 3 things you can hear." She listened intently. The ticking of the clock, faint voices from the hallway, and the rustling of leaves outside. "Perfect. This technique helps anchor you in the present moment," Marcus explained. "It can be a useful tool whenever you start to feel overwhelmed." Maya exhaled slowly, feeling a slight release of tension. "I can see how that helps." They continued the session, focusing on strategies to manage her anxiety. Between sessions, Marcus suggested she keep a small notebook to document her feelings, a tangible record of her emotional journey. "Writing can be therapeutic," he said. "It allows you to process thoughts and recognize patterns." She embraced the idea, grateful for a concrete task. In the days that followed, she carried the notebook everywhere, jotting down moments that triggered distress and noting her reactions. Over time, she began to recognize her triggers: the crowded spaces, sudden loud noises, even certain smells that reminded her of the subway. "Awareness is the first step toward managing your responses," Marcus emphasized during their next meeting. "By understanding what affects you, you can develop strategies to cope." "Like having a map," Maya mused. "I can navigate better when I know where the rough spots are." "Exactly," he smiled. "And remember, boundaries aren't walls. They're flexible membranes that allow you to protect yourself while remaining connected to the world around you." As weeks passed, Maya began to reframe her understanding of the attack. She no longer saw it solely as a defining moment of vulnerability, but as an event that she could integrate into her life narrative without letting it overshadow everything else. The work was exhausting. Each session peeled back layers of internalized fear and addressed the broader context of systemic prejudice that had compounded her trauma. At home, her mother Elena noticed the subtle changes. One evening, as they shared a meal, Elena looked up thoughtfully. "You seem lighter somehow," she observed. "I've missed seeing you like this." Maya smiled softly. "I'm sleeping better," she admitted. "The nightmares aren't as frequent. And at work, I've started taking on new projects again." "That's wonderful, mija," Elena responded, her eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "You've been so strong." "Not always," Maya replied. "But I'm learning that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a therapy session focused on boundary setting. Marcus introduced the idea of role-playing scenarios she might encounter on public transportation. "It's about equipping you with tools," he explained, "both verbal and nonverbal techniques to assert yourself." They stood in the center of the room, the furniture pushed aside to create space. Marcus adopted the role of a stranger, encroaching on her space, while Maya practiced responding. "Remember," he said, Your body language matters as much as your words. Let's start with posture. Maya straightened her spine, shoulders back. Like this? Perfect, he affirmed. Now, make eye contact, not confrontational, but confident. She met his gaze steadily, noticing how empowering it felt to hold her ground. If someone is making you uncomfortable, Marcus continued, it's okay to assert yourself. You can say, please give me some space, or even move to another area without feeling guilty. They practiced various scenarios, from subtle infringements to more overt confrontations. Each time, Maya grew more adept at responding, her confidence building. That was excellent, Marcus praised, after a particularly successful role play. How do you feel? Surprisingly, empowered, she admitted, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. I always thought confidence meant not feeling fear. But I still feel it. I'm just not letting it control me. Exactly, he said. Confidence isn't about eliminating fear, but about moving forward despite it. As she settled back into the armchair, a realization dawned on her. I think I've been striving to go back to who I was before the attack, she reflected. But maybe that's not the goal. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Traumatic experiences change us. The aim isn't to erase them, but to integrate them in a way that we grow stronger. You're evolving, Maya, developing new facets of resilience. She considered his words, feeling a sense of acceptance. This is about reclaiming my narrative, she said slowly, not as a victim, but as a survivor who understands her own power. Well said, Marcus agreed, his eyes warm with approval. You've made remarkable progress. As she left his office that day, the city seemed different. The cacophony of sounds, the honking cars, snippets of conversation, distant sirens, no longer felt as overwhelming. Instead, they were part of the urban symphony she had always loved. Maya decided to take a small but significant step. She walked toward the subway station nearby, pausing at the top of the stairs that led underground. Her heart fluttered, but she reminded herself of the grounding techniques. 5 things I can see, she whispered. The station sign, a coffee shop, a street performer, a mother with her child, a bicyclist. Her breathing steadied. She didn't need to descend the stairs today. That wasn't the point. Standing there, she acknowledged her fear, but didn't let it dictate her actions. A notification pinged on her phone. It was a message from Aisha. Hey, haven't seen you in ages. Coffee soon? Maya smiled, typing back. Yes. How about this weekend? She felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vulnerability, yes, but also a growing sense of agency. The path of healing wasn't linear, but for the first time since the attack, she could envision a future where that moment didn't define her entire existence. Walking away from the station, she headed toward her favorite park. The trees were beginning to show the first signs of autumn, leaves tinged with shades of gold and crimson. Finding an empty bench, she sat down and pulled out her notebook. She began to sketch, the pencil gliding over the paper as images took shape, a blend of abstract forms and bold lines, symbolizing strength and transformation. Art had always been her refuge, and now it felt like a bridge between her past and the person she was becoming. As the afternoon light softened, Maya closed her notebook, feeling a sense of peace. She looked around, watching as children played, couples strolled, and life unfolded in its myriad forms. Her phone vibrated again, this time a message from her colleague Sarah. Your latest design draft is fantastic. Can't wait to see the final version. Maya felt a surge of pride. Returning to her work had been challenging, but she was rediscovering her passion. She stood up, stretching her arms toward the sky, embracing the moment. The journey ahead would have its challenges, but she no longer felt weighed down by the past. Instead, she carried her experiences as part of her story, a narrative of resilience, growth, and self-discovery. As she made her way home, the city lights began to twinkle, each one a tiny beacon in the sprawling metropolis. Maya walked with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to embrace whatever came next. She whispered to herself, "I'm not who I was before, and that's okay. I'm stronger now." And with that affirmation, she stepped confidently into the evening, knowing that while fear might still be a companion at times, it no longer held the reins. The community center buzzed with a quiet intensity that both comforted and electrified Maya. Early autumn sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floors. The room, once intimidating in its unfamiliarity, had become a sanctuary where healing and activism intertwined. Maya sat among fellow survivors, her posture reflecting the transformation that had taken root within her. Gone was the hunched, protective stance of previous months. Instead, she held herself with quiet confidence, her notebook open on her lap, pen poised to capture insights and ideas. The support group that had initially felt like a last resort had evolved into something far more powerful, a catalyst for both personal and social change. Diane stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding, yet nurturing. Her dark curls were streaked with silver, and she wore a vibrant Ankara print dress that seemed to embody the strength and beauty of their collective resistance. "Today," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "we're discussing community advocacy and turning our individual experiences into collective action." The words resonated deeply with Maya. Her hands, which had once trembled uncontrollably during these meetings, now gripped her notebook with purpose. The journey from that traumatic subway encounter to this moment had been complex, filled with therapy sessions, sleepless nights, and the gradual rebuilding of her sense of self. But sitting here, surrounded by others who understood, she felt the weight of isolation lifting. Michael, who had become a close friend since their first meeting, sat across from her. His initial corporate rigidity had softened into something more authentic. "Sometimes," he shared with the group, "the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be silenced." Neither one of them spoke. Regina nodded in agreement, adjusting her purple scarf with practiced elegance. "Our stories, when woven together, create a tapestry too powerful to ignore." Maya's first opportunity for public speaking came unexpectedly. A local community organization, responding to increased reports of racist incidents on public transportation, was hosting a panel on urban safety and racism. Marcus, during one of their therapy sessions, had mentioned it casually. "They're looking for voices from the community," he said, watching her carefully. "People who can speak to personal experiences and their impact." The old Maya would have recoiled from such exposure, but something had shifted within her. The trauma no longer defined her. It was becoming a catalyst for change. During their next session, she surprised both Marcus and herself by declaring, "I want to speak at the panel." Marcus smiled, pride evident in his expression. "What changed?" he asked gently. Maya considered the question. "I realized that staying silent means letting fear win, and I'm tired of fear making decisions for me." The preparation was meticulous. With Marcus's guidance and the support group's collective wisdom, Maya crafted a narrative that was both deeply personal and universally resonant. She spoke about the silence of bystanders, the psychological violence of racist encounters, and the profound impact of community support. Her graphic design skills, temporarily dormant during her recovery, found new purpose. Late into the night, she created visual narratives, infographics, that illustrated the prevalence of racial harassment, illustrations that captured the emotional toll of everyday racism, designs that made visible the often invisible experiences of marginalized communities. Elena noticed her daughter working with renewed passion. "Your art has always been powerful, Mija," she observed one evening, studying Maya's latest designs. "But now it speaks with even more truth." The day of the community panel arrived crisp and clear. Maya chose her outfit carefully, a deep blue blazer that represented both calm and strength, paired with comfortable shoes that made her feel grounded. As she entered the auditorium, she saw familiar faces from her support group scattered throughout the audience, each one offering silent encouragement. The panel included activists, lawyers, and community leaders. Maya sat among them, no longer feeling like an imposter, but recognizing that her voice carried its own validity. When her turn came to speak, the auditorium fell silent. "Racism isn't just about isolated incidents," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It's a systemic disease that infects public spaces, transforming them from shared environments into sites of potential violence. But the antidote exists in community, in solidarity, in our collective refusal to accept this as normal." She shared her story, not just the attack, but the aftermath, the healing, the transformation. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding, tears being wiped away, and most importantly, recognition in the eyes of those who had lived similar experiences. Elena sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, not of sorrow, but of profound pride. She had watched her daughter transform from a victim to an advocate, recognizing in Maya's strength the legacy of their immigrant resilience. The impact of the panel rippled outward. Local transit authorities, previously defensive about addressing racial harassment, began engaging more seriously with community concerns. Maya's graphic designs started circulating on social media, creating visual testimonies that resonated far beyond their city. Her creative director at the design studio, who had supported her through her recovery, now saw a renewed energy in Maya's work. "These aren't just designs," he told her, reviewing her latest project. "These are powerful statements about human dignity and social justice." The support group evolved alongside Maya's transformation. Under Diane's guidance, they began organizing workshops on bystander intervention, creating resource guides for survivors of racial harassment, and developing training programs for transit workers and community organizations. One evening, as Maya worked late at the community center, Diane joined her. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "healing isn't just about recovering what was lost. Sometimes it's about discovering who you were meant to become." Maya looked up from her laptop, where she was finalizing designs for an anti-racism campaign. "I never imagined this is where that subway incident would lead me," she admitted. "Trauma can break us open," Diane replied, "but what grows from that breaking is up to us." The next support group meeting, Maya shared her latest initiative, a series of workshops combining art therapy with advocacy training. "Art helped me find my voice," she explained to the group. "Maybe it can help others too." The idea took root. Soon the community center's walls were adorned with artwork created by survivors, each piece telling a story of pain transformed into power. Maya's graphic designs provided a professional framework, but the raw emotion of personal experiences gave the exhibition its soul. And her relationship with public transportation evolved too. While the memory of the attack remained, it no longer held the same power over her. One morning, she found herself spontaneously helping a lost tourist navigate the subway system, realizing with quiet amazement that she had reclaimed these spaces not just for herself, but as part of a larger community. The final piece of her transformation came unexpectedly. A year after the incident, Maya was invited to speak at a national conference on urban safety and racial justice. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces, activists, survivors, allies, and felt the full circle of her journey. "Our stories matter," she declared, her voice strong and clear, "not just as testimonies of trauma, but as blueprints for change. When we transform our pain into action, our isolation into community, we create ripples that touch countless lives." In the audience, she spotted familiar faces. Marcus watching with quiet pride, Elena beaming through tears, Diane nodding in approval, and members of her support group, each one a testament to the power of collective healing. After the conference, Maya stood outside the venue, breathing in the cool evening air. The city lights sparkled against the darkening sky, and the steady rhythm of urban life pulsed around her. A subway train rumbled beneath her feet, and she smiled, recognizing how far she had come. Her phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Powerful speech. Coffee tomorrow to celebrate. She typed back quickly, absolutely, the usual place? As she walked home that night, Maya reflected on her journey. The trauma that had once threatened to define her had instead become a gateway to something larger than herself. She had found not just healing, but purpose, not just support, but community. The city, with all its complexities and challenges, was still her home. But now she moved through it differently, not as a victim, not just as a survivor, but as an advocate, an artist, a voice for change. Maya reached her apartment building and paused, looking up at the night sky barely visible between the towering structures. She thought about all the others out there, those still struggling, those beginning to heal, those finding their voices. Her work wasn't finished. In many ways, it was just beginning. But she was ready for whatever came next, knowing that her strength lay not just in her own resilience, but in the bonds of solidarity she had forged along the way. She whispered into the night air, "We rise together." And with those words, Maya stepped forward into her future, carrying with her the wisdom of her past and the promise of continued transformation. The story of her trauma had become a story of triumph, not just for herself, but for all those who would find hope in her journey.